promises the preservation of tradition. And it's important for women so they could maintain a religious home. What were girls taught in his school? Okay. First of all, the school was supervised by the state. By World War I, graduates of his school were accepted into German universities without an entrance exam. As the major historian of German Jewry emphasized, the most innovative element in his school was not just that it was a high school for religious Orthodox kids, but the formal teaching of religion to girls. They were taught the Chumash, the Pentateuch in German, and some, a few biblical books, the Tehillim, some other Megillot, and so on. And they were also taught their religious obligations. Unlike the boys, the girls were not taught, obviously, as we can imagine, they were not taught the Talmud or anything that had to do with the oral law. So commentary, they didn't teach them Rashi, only the commentary of Hirsch, no legal codes and so on, because those works included passages from the oral law. So this was really the first time that formal religious education was introduced to women. Later on, similar schools were opened in other German Orthodox community. Another innovation taking place also in Germany was introduced by Rabbi Azriel Hildesheimer. He was the rabbi of the Orthodox community in Berlin. And what he didn't establish a full-fledged school, but rather a supplementary school for boys and girls who studied in German high schools. A third of his students were girls. The teacher Hildesheimer also established rabbinical seminaries, and many of the teachers were studying at the same time at his seminary, rabbinical seminary. By the way, it was the first Orthodox rabbinical seminary. Until then, in order to become a rabbi, one had to study in a yeshiva. And many of the teachers had academic degrees. The program for girls in his supplementary school included the Chumash, some chapters of the Bible, Pirkei Avot, and religious instructions pertaining to women. How, and as I said in the beginning, there's always a need for some justification. And in a letter that Hildesheimer wrote in 1888 to a former student of his who lived at the time in Hungary, he wrote the following, and I'll read it. In former times, the parents could always be trusted to set an example of religious life. But unfortunately, as is well known, times have changed. Even educationally, a knowledge of the original text of the Bible is most desirable. The education of boys, and naturally of a girl too, rests in the first place on an ethical consciousness and on promoting a sense of morality, which, however, can only be achieved by knowledge of the original text of the many passages not included in the prayer book. And he added, one second. One must add to the first point that it is a disgrace and a humiliation of our holy faith if girls, and this does not only happen in the so-called upper classes, are taught Hungarian in German district in Hungary, and German in Hungarian district, as well as French and often English, as well as dancing and music, but are not given the slightest idea of the sources of their own religion. So those who are familiar with what the Chafetz Chaim and other rabbis in Eastern Europe said 3 decades later, they used more or less the same type of justification. We can't trust the parents anymore, so they have to be, and that the girls are taught everything else, so they must at this time be taught the original text in order to preserve their faith. So those are the very beginning, and they all took place in Germany. What about Eastern Europe? I want to show a map here for those who are unfamiliar. So we have Eastern Europe. Generally, when people say Eastern Europe, they mean the Russian Empire. If we look at the left, Galicia is the southeastern part of what used to be the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and at the end of the 18th century, this part was annexed to Austro-Hungary. At that time, it was called the Habsburg Empire or the Austrian Empire. If you look at the map on the left, on the very top, on the right-hand side, it says Galicia. Now, if we move to the Russian Empire, if we go, I'm looking now at the map on the right. If you go all the way up, it's hard to see. We have Warsaw, and if we go a little further up, it's Lithuania. So Warsaw, Lithuania, it's all part of the Russian Empire, while Galicia is part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Let me go back. So we'll start with a situation in Galicia, okay? I usually don't like to use that phrase Eastern Europe. It's a very, very vague term. The legal system was completely different in Galicia. Jews were emancipated in Galicia in Austro-Hungary in late 1867, while in Russia, of course, they were not emancipated at all during the time. So in Galicia, like before, there was no formal Jewish education for girls. However, I should say the Austrian Empire introduced a law of compulsory education in 1869. There was, a few years later, there was a Galician version which reduced the number of years required, while in Austria it was 8 years, in Galicia it was 6 years of mandatory education for all, okay? The Orthodox were able, what alarmed the Orthodox is what will be done with the boys. The Cheder was considered an institution that has to remain as it is, and through all kinds of political agreements, promises to vote for the Poles and so on, the Orthodox were able to keep their sons, most of them, in the Cheder. The Poles themselves were not so interested in having an influx of thousands of boys into the Polish public school, so they turned a blind eye. But the girls were sent by parents, including the very ultra-Orthodox, the Hasidim. They were sent to public and private schools, Polish schools, depending on their economic status. And we can imagine when something like this happened, there is a growing gap between boys and girls. Girls go to Polish school, they know the Polish language. At that time, since this part of Poland was within the Austrian Empire, Polish nationalism was very strong. Also, Roman Catholicism is part of Polish nationalism to this day. With time, the girls who went to school, an experience that was not shared by their mothers or by their home parents, had no idea what they studied, but there was a growing up between them and young men who continue to be educated in Cheder, Talmud Torah, or yeshivas. When time came from arranged marriages, girls with a strong will, who found nothing in common with such men that their parents expected them to marry. Many girls fled their home, and I found names of over 300 girls, close to 350 girls. And where could a girl run away to at that time? To a convent. That's the only place that would give them shelter. And there were over 300 girls who converted at that time to Catholicism. Those who didn't, of course, most of them did not convert, but those who remained, even if they got married, the relations between husband and wives, at least to all kinds of reports from this period, they lived a separate lives, men and women. One second. So this is Galicia. In the Russian Empire, Hasidic parents who were affluent would hire tutors for their girls because there was no prohibition for girls to study secular subjects, and parents hired tutors to teach them classic literature, languages, and so on. But while in the Russian Empire, because there was no mandatory education, socialization with non-Jewish friends didn't take place because they were tutored privately at their home. In Galicia, they went to school, and socialization became part of their daily life, socialization with non-Jewish girls. Now, what did rabbis who were aware of what was going on, did they do anything? Total inaction. I have to say that some of them, those who are familiar with the name Rabbi Mordechai Svadron, he and another individual came up with an idea to introduce formal education, but they always looked over their shoulders to usually Hasidic rabbis, zealots, and so on, who would criticize them, and this had a chilling effect on them, and they stopped, didn't take any steps to introduce changes. And as time went by 1900, they all go, or I would say it's even late 1870s, starting 1880s, all the girls go to school. And as I said before, since this became now the new, so to speak, norm, only a crisis would initiate a change. In this case, the crisis would be the World War, as we'll soon see. Moving right along, okay. World War, and here again I'll speak about different regions in Eastern Europe. The first Orthodox schools, although we think it's Beis Yaakov and Shenir, for those who are familiar with it, the first Orthodox Jewish high school was actually established in 1915 in Kovno in Lithuania during World War I. A few neo-Orthodox rabbis meaning those who follow the Torah in Derech Eretz, the Hirschian Torah in Derech Eretz system. So some of the rabbis were, some enlisted on their own, some were part of the, were mobilized into the army, and two of them, and as you can see, they are all what we call rabbiner doctor. Most of them are also graduates of the Hildesheimer Rabbinical Seminary. And two of them in this case, Rabbi Joseph Karlebach and Leopold Rosenack, they opened a Jewish gymnasium modeled after the Hirschian first example, a high school for boys and girls. In the beginning, they had separate classes. Later, when the school grew, they had separate wings for boys and for girls. They taught in the German language. They were all German soldiers. The secular subjects they taught in the German language. Religious subjects were taught by local yeshiva students. One of the teachers, and it's important for us to remember his name, was Rabbi Dr. Leo Deutschlander, again another graduate of Hildesheimer Rabbinical Seminary. He excelled as a pedagogue. He wrote several textbooks to teach in the school, and he remains an important figure for us. So the first school, Lithuania, Kovno, 1915. Why did it stop? 1 second. Okay. Second school, 1917 in Warsaw, the Chavatzelet School. Again, a high school, this time just for Jewish girls. Now we have to remember Warsaw, the strongest group there were the Ger Hasidim. The German army occupied Warsaw in 1915. They created a Jewish department. One of the roles of the Jewish department was to reform the Cheder system. And two informal delegates of a German Orthodox organization came to Warsaw on their own expense. They were not soldiers. Immanuel Karlebach, okay, he was a brother of, we mentioned before, Joseph Karlebach. We mentioned before in Kovno, Leopold Rosenack. He's a brother-in-law of Immanuel Karlebach. So it's all of in the family. They were all, both of them were rabbis in Germany, and again, graduates of Hildesheimer Seminary. Chavatzelet, it's from Shir Hashirim, Ani Chavatzelet Hasharon, and so on. They brought a German Neo-Orthodox director. Again, you can see also a graduate of the Hildesheimer Rabbinical Seminary. Now, what was unique in this gymnasium in Chavatzelet was that it prepared the student. In Europe to this day, we have a baccalaureate exam. In Polish, it's called the Matura. So it also offer the option of the Matura. We have and here I have a quote from a memoir of one of the graduates of this school. And here's what she writes. The religious studies principal was the only religious faculty member, okay, because this school was accredited. They didn't have appropriate religious teachers to teach the mandatory subject. He taught Chumash, Navi, history, and basic Hebrew grammar. He wasn't a bad teacher, but his efforts weren't successful because the majority of the girls were too sophisticated for his approach. religious studies took about 1 hour per day because I had to prepare for the Matura examinations, although not all of them took those exams. It's important to note that one of the students there was the granddaughter of the Gerer Rebbe, Rivka Alter. We don't have any evidence that there was any opposition to this school, and in any event, Hasidim in Warsaw were more concerned about the Cheder system and the fear that it's going to be reformed, but with the help of those two German delegates, the changes in the Cheder system were rather cosmetic, and the second reason was that girls, like everywhere else, especially the rich, were taught privately. There were already defection of some girls, so the gymnasium was viewed as a corrective to a bad situation. Moving along. In Lithuania, I'm arranging it chronologically. In 1920, okay, so it's after World War I, okay, in order to further develop Jewish education in Lithuania, local rabbis, together with Deutschlander remained in Lithuania. He got a position as the advisor. Lithuania by now was an independent state, except Vilna, Grodno was annexed to Poland. So Deutschlander was an advisor to the Lithuanian religious minister. In 1920, as I said, locals with him established an organization called Yavne to promote Jewish education. They opened many Jewish primary schools where the Pentateuch was, or the Chumash was taught to girls with Rashi. Usually in the teaching in the Yavne school were conducted in the Hebrew language, okay? Again, we don't have evidence, at least I didn't find any evidence that there was opposition to this change of norms. What happened, again, too, the crisis of the war, the devastation, and also independent Lithuania introduced compulsory education. So in order to make sure that religious kids go receive a religious education, they introduced those schools who were full-fledged schools with a state program plus religious education. Okay. But talking specifically about girls, the crown of the activities of Yavne was establishment of 3 female high schools, 3 female gymnasia. They were established by the heads of the yeshivas in this place. So until the first gymnasium for girls, 1921. In Kovno, by this time, the first schools that was established in Kovno wasn't exactly religious schools. And in Ponevezh, for those who are familiar with the name of Rav Kahneman was behind the establishment of the girls' gymnasium in Ponevezh, and entails Rabbi Bloch. The reason they did that was when Lithuania was part of the Russian Empire, Orthodox parents didn't send their girls to Russian schools, but once Lithuania was established and the Tarbut organization, this was a Zionist organization, they established primary and high schools, and it was attractive to many Jewish parents because those were Jewish schools. So in order to make sure that they don't lose their daughters to the Tarbut gymnasia. They established those schools. The curriculum in the three girls' gymnasia was very rigorous, also in terms of the secular subject and the religious subjects. They were taught Chumash. I saw a report in a journal of the Orthodox women. Students of the school also had study groups with mefarshim, with Agadah. They conducted siyum celebrations and so on. As of the opposition, I saw one footnote by Rabbi Mordechai Gifter, who might be familiar to some of you. He was the head of the Telz Yeshiva in Cleveland. His grandfather-in-law, Rabbi Bloch, was a founder of the gymnasium in Telz. And he wrote somewhere that there was some initial, not opposition, but uneasiness with his project, something completely new. But with time, this dissipated. It's important to emphasize, even though we didn't start with Poland yet, that their education philosophy, as most of you probably know, Hasidism didn't take hold in Lithuania. Their philosophy remained more moderate, where the religious institutions that later developed in Poland were less moderate because they all operated under an insular Hasidic worldview. Okay. In Galicia, the crisis, while in the areas that I discussed until now, the crisis was associated with World War I. In Galicia, already 4 decades before the war, there is a crisis really by epic proportions that I mentioned, conversion and so on, because this bifurcated life of Jewish girls going to Polish school during the day, speaking Polish, returning home, and to a Yiddish-speaking home with brothers and fathers who they had nothing in common. In 1903, there was a huge rabbinic assembly in Krakow with rabbis from all over, even from Palestine. And one of the rabbis there talked about the many cases of Galician girls who are leaving the Jewish religion, and those who stay, said her heart and practice already is estranged for them. And he said those women would not raise a type of Jewish generation that we expect. And when we think about the secularization in the interwar period, we have to remember that I don't think there was any research into that, what happened to mothers already beforehand and their education. But during that rabbinical assembly, one of the participants suggested to establish Talmud Torah for girls in every city. He was hashed by some other zealot rabbi, somebody from Ukraine, and the thing was never raised again. Now, in Galicia, there was no meeting between East and West, as there was no German occupation in Galicia. Getting late, but there was a Krakow woman, Sarah Shenira, okay, born in 1883. As many other Galician Jews, she spent the war years in Vienna, where she encountered, she went to a synagogue. There wasn't exactly a Neo-Orthodox synagogue, but the rabbi there was spent many years in Krakow, and he gave talks and sermons that were also geared to women. He talked also to women. This happened to her for the first time. She herself, Shanira, a daughter of Belzer Hasidim, she completed, like all girls, primary school. She went to the theater, many lectures. Galicia, especially Krakow at this time, feminism was on the rise, and she experienced in her own life the bifurcated existence of Jewish girls. When she went back to her city in 1917, she got the blessing of the Belzer Rebbe, and she established a supplementary school, a sort of afternoon school, a sort of a cheder for young girls. Of course, she couldn't run a school. She didn't have the appropriate education. And she taught them, we have, I'll skip this because time is getting short. What she taught didn't include textual study. She didn't teach Chumash or any other religious text. So for those, I know there are some people who say, you know, she taught Limudei Kodesh. She didn't teach any textual studies. In 1919, her school, the local Agudat Israel, the Orthodox party, suggested to her to take her school under its wing, because here we have this woman who did everything on her own. She consulted with a Bob Rebbe, who was an opponent of Agudat Israel. She was not sure that he agreed to that, but he gave permission, and the local Aguda took the school under its wing and helped develop it. It was now named Bet Yaakov or Beis Yaakov. Some say that it's named after somebody by the name of Yaakov who funded the school, but probably also Ko Tomar lebet Yaakov tagid livnei Israel. So Bet Yaakov, Rashi said, ele anashim. He moved to a new building with many, was like eight rooms. It kept going, okay? I'll skip that a little. And when word got around about our school, Jews from communities around Krakow came to see. The ground was ripe for that. Now that it's not just a crisis, but somebody now took the initiative, and she was the only woman among all the other examples that I gave here. And they came to see what was going on, and she taught young students ages 12 and 13 how to become teachers. And by 1924, there are also already 19 similar schools. Of course, there are no textbooks and so on. None of those schools taught religious text. The turning point is in 1924, when Agudat Israel, especially its Keren HaTorah, which was a fund established to support Torah education. Until then, it was established in the first assembly of Agudat Israel in 1923. Until then, it supported only Torah education for men. Now, the decision was that it should also support Jewish religious education for girls. Deutschlander, who I mentioned several times, he was a director of Keren HaTorah, and he became very involved. He was also a pedagogue. So in order to start the whole initiative, the idea was to establish a network of school. He brought several female teachers from Germany, Frankfurt, some other places. They were all graduate of gymnasia. Some were university students. But what they introduced, although they used Hirsch and so on, classes were taught in Yiddish, so unlike in Lithuania. and no Beis Yaakov gymnasia was established in Poland. Chavatzelet continued to function until World War I, but the Polish model, or what I call the Krakow model, departed from that path of high school for girls. Well, instead, what was introduced in Poland, the highest learning institution for girls was the teacher seminary. A 2-year seminary where girls were accepted after completing primary school, okay? Keren Torah, with the help of Leo Jung, by the way, they had a whole, to get money to build the seminary, so they sent emissaries all over the place, and Krakow, not Warsaw, which is the capital of Poland, with Chavatzelet, Krakow, which was the epicenter of the crisis, became not only the place where the teacher seminary was established, but it became also the administrative center for the whole network. In the seminary, Chumash was taught in the seminary. Hebrew girls had to know Yiddish, not Hebrew. All the commentaries and even the Chumash that they had to bring with them was a Chumash and a Tanakh with a Yiddish translation. Unlike in Lithuania, where intellectual rigor was very important, the emphasis on Krakow was an enthusiasm, character building, and commitment to Yiddishkeit, more than on deep textual study. Okay, this I said already. The flagship became the teachers' seminary. And by the way, the teacher seminary was the height of the highest institution available to women in late 19th century. But by this time, women went to high school, went to the university. Of course, the seminary didn't grant, it was just 2 years after primary school, it didn't grant the matura, so a graduate couldn't enter the university. Not only that, it opposed specifically, there were articles against higher education. The purpose was to make the girls frum, enthusiastic about the religion, not making the girls learn, as some are trying to say today. Emotional commitment rather than intellectual achievement were the hallmark of the Beis Yaakov education. So I know I went a little too far, but we started a little late. So if you have any questions, I'm ready to.
Thank you. I want to say a big thank you to Professor Manekin. I'll just start off with a question or two, and then we'll open it up, and people can raise their hands. Maybe that's the easiest way, or it's not a very big crowd. You can really probably just say. You know, it's interesting. In a way, I think we're often trained to assume that women's education began as Beis Yaakov, and then more modern things that we know kind of broke off from it, or they were a deviation from the norm. But really, it's fascinating because that's a kind of revisionist history that we imagine. I don't know why, but you see that from what you're saying, it really was much more open-minded education. And Beis Yaakov was a kind of more narrowing effect. What I'm curious about is Rabbi Kahneman and Rabbi Bloch. They were willing to just take the model from the Hildesheimer Seminary and put it into practice. I mean, I imagine them, I understand that in Poland it was more insular, but I imagine them as pretty insular. They didn't have a problem with just kind of assimilating the Hildesheimer model?
So it wasn't exactly the Hildesheimer model because they taught Ivrit be'Ivrit, they taught religious text in Hebrew. The language of instruction was was Hebrew, whereas the German model was they taught in German using German translation. But they did it because they lost girl to the Talmud school. I have a friend whose father, Rabbi Rozovsky, was a mashgiach in the Ponevezh Yeshiva in Bnei Brak. And she told me that while her father, who was from Grodno, which is a Lithuanian town, which after World War I belonged to Poland, he was sent to yeshiva, and his sisters, because there was no high school in Grodno, no Orthodox, were sent to Talmud school. One of them became a communist, one of them went somewhere else, and so on. So it was just to make sure that girls remain within Orthodoxy. That's my, I didn't see anywhere that he said that, but I assume that was the reason. And as in Lithuania, intellectual rigor was important. So whatever you do for boys, or I'm not Lithuanian, so the school was really on the high level. I think Tablet had something, I forget her name, maybe Ausland, I think she was a graduate of the Telz Yavne High School. She died in May, and there is an article about her in Tablet.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Others have questions, feel free to just chime in. Oh, Danny, go ahead. Get your hand up.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
So when I was hearing your presentation, I was thinking a lot about Daniel Kupfert Heller's book called Jabotinsky's Children.
Yes.
Which is about he's kind of breaking down the myth that Jews were not invested in fascist movements, where his central argument is that the intellectual roots of fascism were ones that Jabotinsky used through the rhetoric of Beitar in the background of Mussolini and Pilsudski, specifically in Poland. So I'm interested in kind of these notions of the nation state that were very prevalent in that intellectual milieu. And I know that there's also scholarship between the relationship between that type of nationalism and gender. How did that affect the ways in which Jewish women were taught at the time?
So in the seminary, because the seminary was accredited by the Polish government, they had to be taught what every teacher seminary would teach, that Polish history and so on. But the girls were discouraged. Sarah Schneer herself wrote a lot. The girls were discouraged to speak Polish. They were encouraged to speak only Yiddish. So there was an effort, because Polish nationalism was so strong, and the fear that nationalism literature would sway them away. There was an effort to kind of keep them within a Yiddish worldview, even refrain from speaking Polish with their friends and so on. There were many textbooks written for them in the Yiddish language also. So to create a sort of a total atmosphere. I don't know if that answers your question. By the way, there were also, the Mizrahi also had schools and high schools. I was just talking about I didn't speak about them. And it's not what the rabbi said before. I mean, Yavne Initiative also, there's very little research. It's not that if I discovered it. I just want to make sure that the Lithuania and Chavatzelet, not much is written about it, but contemporary reports, talks in the assemblies of Agudat Israel and so on, elaborate a lot about what was going on in these schools. But Danny, I don't know if I answered your question. So there was a pool of Polish nationalism was certainly something that the Bes Yaakov tried to kind of keep the girls away from.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, I'm very interested in, I've always been under the impression that in kind of many of these societies, right, it's kind of the men who would go off and study and be in the army, and the women would be at home tending the children, raising more children. And I'm wondering kind of how that perception of gender influenced the ways in which the women were educated and socialized.
So I didn't go into that, but one of the things that Bes Yaakov did more than other areas which I mentioned, or other Agudat Israel, they created women's organizations, girls associations, a lot of activities that provided girls something that they didn't have before, a kind of solidarity with other girls, a whole world where they could identify with. So it was not just the school, it was a whole world of, there's Batya, Benos for older girls, Neshei Agudat Israel, a lot of activities, summer camps, and so on. So a whole world was created for them, which was very important in terms of gender.
Thank you. And any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Manekin, and I wish you well in Israel. Hopefully
Thank
we'll all
you.
be back in person sometime soon.
Yeah, we need 14 days. We need to be self-quarantined for 14 days, and then we can start.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of reading and writing. Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Have a good week.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye. Take care. Bye.